Hey everybody, it's Alan Brochstein from New Cannabis Ventures and 420 Investor, and coming at you with the weekly recap. It was a tough week to say the least. All the indices made new lows. We had kind of a tease this week with it was a one-day wonder when it was all said and done with the Canadian LPs leading the way on Tuesday. It was all sparked by some commentary on CNBC about options. Kind of silly, but it looked like it was working. Uh, I spent a lot of time talking about this as it played out over the week with 420 Investor subscribers. Unfortunately, it didn't hold, and so the index is now down. The global cannabis stock index that we maintain is now down. Uh, is it 4.5% year to date, something like that, and indeed a tough week. A few weeks ago, I was talking about a divergence, and we had seen the the American Cannabis Operators Index, which is mainly MSOs and single state operators, but also a handful of CBD companies, had seemingly put in a bottom. And of course, it took it out, not this week, but a little bit earlier. But I would note that these stocks do continue to outperform the broader market. It's kind of interesting. So that's kind of where we are. I'm calling this year the Great Round Trip. It's not so great, by the way. We got ahead of ourselves early in the year, and the pendulum swung too far, and it seems to me like it's swinging too far the other way, but I'll get back to that thought in just a moment. So again, what I try to do in these videos is share some of the key news of the week, and then also to add some context to that. And these key news items are what we feature in our weekly newsletter that goes out on Sunday mornings. You can subscribe to that. There's a link in the video that you can click to subscribe to it, or you can just visit New Cannabis Ventures on Sunday morning around 11 Eastern is when we publish it to the website. So actually, I'm going to go right to the top, and then we'll hit the news stories. And the top is, so each week I also share an observation, an idea. It's really literally the only editorial that I take when it comes to New Cannabis Ventures. I spend a lot of time at 420 Investor telling people what I truly think, what I expect, things like that. But at New Cannabis Ventures, we're a news source. We're not trying to move the markets or influence people. But this is an exception. Not that we're trying to move the markets, but we are trying to share just one nugget a week. And so this week, if you recall, and I was doing the videos back then, 5 weeks ago, I pointed to a little bit of a disconnect in the short term, and that was the stock prices of GrowGen, Hydrofarm, and Scott's Miracle-Gro, all of which are big suppliers to the cannabis industry, were making new lows, while the cannabis industry stocks, the cannabis stocks, appeared to be bottoming. And so it was a little bit of a warning, or I didn't tell people which way it was going to go because I didn't know, but it was a little bit of a warning potentially that those stocks were signaling trouble ahead, or that maybe the bottoming process in cannabis in general made for an opportunity in those three stocks that I just mentioned. Well, interestingly, Scott's Miracle-Gro is actually up since our newsletter. That's the one that I've liked the most, by the way. But Hydrofarm and GrowGen have tanked. And so in the newsletter, I revisit that. And today I talked about three different stocks. And I'm going to pretty much leave it at that. But these stocks that are leveraged, Scott's Miracle-Gro, Hydrofarm, and GrowGen, all leveraged to build-outs, have declined. And the overall market has. So it almost looks like, oh God, the world's coming to an end for the cannabis sector. But this week I look at three REITs, and they're painting a very different story. And the fact is, broadly speaking, they're leveraged to the exact same trend. So I guess I'd throw it out this week that either investors are making a huge mistake about potentially the hydroponic suppliers, or certainly potentially the cannabis sector, or they're making a mistake with these REITs. It doesn't make a lot of sense, and I'll let you read for that. But so each week we highlight, like I said, key news, and the curated press releases that we typically run fall into three categories. Financial reports, we didn't get any this week. We're going to get a flood of them starting in 2 weeks. So you'll hear me talking about that a lot in the days ahead. None this week. And then the other two types of press releases we typically run would be capital raises or M&A. And I'll get back to that in a moment, but I want to start with something. This is the first time since I've been doing this 6 weeks now, 7 weeks, that I have a different type of press release that we ran, and that was a management change. Now, generally, management changes aren't that big of a deal, but I got to tell you, see you later, Sebastian. I don't think anybody was upset. Probably nobody was surprised. I'm talking about the CEO of Hexo getting the boot. So we did run that one. I think it's an important story. Hexo is trading very close to its all-time lows, back to March of 2020 lows. And I know a lot of Canadian LPs are trading weekly, but to see they're one of the larger by revenue LPs, not necessarily by enterprise value or market cap these days. But it'll be really interesting to see what happens this week. Why do I say that? Because their Q4 financials are due this week, and they haven't even announced that they're coming out. So this is something to watch, because if you're an investor in Hexo, you may not like the fact that your earnings look like they may be delayed. We'll see. But we did run that press release because I think I had a feeling it would serve as a inflection point potentially for the company. I don't know if to the day. It was interesting because that Monday things were weak in general, and Hexo did post a 52-week low. But wow, did it rally the next day along with a few other stocks. So in terms of M&A, there was one deal of note, and that was Green Lane acquiring Da Vinci, a vaporizer company, for $20 million. They didn't put that in the press release, but it was in a SEC filing. And that $20 million was $10 million in cash. I forgot the exact amount up front in stock. I want to say like 5.25 million or 5.75. And then the balance in milestones and earnouts. So that was not particularly well received. Obviously, Green Lane made a low this week. But that was on the M&A front. And then in terms of capital raises, wow. And this ties into this overall theme I've been talking about in terms of, in stark contrast to the end of 2019 when there was a vaping crisis, and then into the pandemic, when people like myself were wondering, how the heck are we going to come up with the money needed to build additional cultivation in the years ahead? That was a very real concern. The stock prices were really low, and there was not an abundance of capital available from other sources. Well, that has changed. That's been, in fact, probably the biggest story of 2021. Maybe new states legalizing, but it's the increasing availability of capital. So we had 3 press releases that we have in the newsletter this week. First of all, and we have an interview with Sundial on Monday, so that'll be interesting, just to kind of get a better picture for what their strategy is. But Sundial funded in a JV formed with a bank in Canada. It's called Sunstream, the JV, and they've funded several different projects. And they just funded Jushi for a $100 million credit facility to help them pay the cash portion of acquisitions. So I think Jushi used $40 million of the $100 million to cover their recent Massachusetts acquisition. So that was the first one. The second one was IIPR, which obviously has raised and deployed a lot of capital. They're a mortgage REIT, equity REIT, and the second piece of fundraising news is that they purchased the facility of Gold Flora in California. We've interviewed the CEO there before. So they did a sale leaseback, and I'm not looking at it, but it was like $60 million all in between the purchase price and additional investment. So that was another big capital raise. And I have to peek. I'm forgetting the third one. Oh yeah, how did I forget that one? Verano. So they had borrowed, I forgot the exact rate. I want to say maybe 9.75% previously. The rate has dropped. Exact same lenders, same terms and all that, but it's 8.5%. And they just borrowed another 120 million, and they have the capacity to ramp it up by an additional 100 million. And so look, 8.5% is expensive for most industries, but for the cannabis industry, with all the growth ahead and all that, and considering the choice between that and selling equity, it's a great deal. And unfortunately, with 280E, these tax payments aren't even deductible. So, but with that said, it's just more evidence of an abundance of capital, and that gets to the feature article that I wrote in the newsletter that you can read about. All right. So then, in addition to the curated press releases each week, all of our proprietary content makes it into the newsletter as well. This week was a little bit light. For I think the second week in a row, we just had one interview. That interview was with a startup. We typically don't do startups, but this one was kind of interesting due to the funders that they got. And it was also interesting because it's such a great story for any of you out there that are looking to get into the industry for two reasons, or maybe three. First, this company, Dispense, they were already doing something outside of the cannabis industry, and the pandemic presented them an opportunity. So it's another example of somebody who knows what they're doing and applying it to the cannabis industry. And that's good for them, and it's good for the cannabis industry. And the second part of this that was interesting was their very first client was Ascend Wellness, and their big Collinsville, Illinois, which is near St. Louis, I believe, store needed some help. I guess if I can read between the lines, they had all these customers that wanted to do pickup, and they couldn't manage it, so they turned to this company, and I guess things worked out really well because Ascend's using them in other places, and they've picked up additional customers. So I think the second story is sometimes, you just have to start with one good customer. So that was one piece. You can read the interview write-up that we have, or listen to the whole interview. Very capable woman running that company. And then the other proprietary news that we ran this week was about the Canadian market. I do a monthly update there based on StatsCan data, and that was a positive surprise. Certainly didn't seem to engender any love from investors because they took all the Canadian LPs to the woodshack on Friday after that big run-up Tuesday. But so it was a better than expected number, and you can read my write-up, but I think the answer is Ontario, where there's been a lot more stores open, but growth across all provinces, but especially in Ontario. So again, keeping it a little bit shorter this week. Next week, probably not going to be that exciting. I had thought this week might be a little bit more exciting with MJ BizCon. A lot of times companies time press releases, big news around that, and there really wasn't a lot of big news this week, unfortunately, and maybe that kind of plays into why stock prices did what they did. There's just lack of news flow. So next week, probably quiet as we wrap up the month of October, but then get ready, November, those first 2 weeks, super busy with tons and tons of earnings reports. If you want to stay on top of that, we have a calendar at New Cannabis Ventures where it makes it really easy for you to know who's reporting when, and to also access those conference calls or replays if you care. So with that, I'm going to wish you a good luck. Have a great week, everybody. Take care.